Welcome to Simply Enough. This is Zachary and Elizabeth, and thanks for tuning in.
If you're liking our podcast, we'd love it if you'd share with your friends and family.
And then rate and review to raise our visibility and spread the message of enoughness.
We love you, and remember, you are simply enough.
Just as you are.
Period.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Simply Enough. I'm Mr. Zachary Linnert.
And I'm Dr. Elizabeth Ignacio. And Zachary, I was thinking of just some of our past episodes and really actually reflecting on all of our episodes and really like kind of the theme of Simply Enough and, kind of working on ourselves and becoming more self-aware. And I know for me, just kind of my journey of self-assessment and self-awareness, there was very much a component of the need to kind of bolster myself up. So in talking about, self and self-awareness, a lot of it was about, empowerment and self-compassion and boundaries and strength. And that's all important and necessary and healthy. I also wanted to throw in that when my initial process was very much kind of not me against the world, but just again, in lifting myself up, kind of having to build self-confidence, build self-esteem, build self-care. There's a part of the self which also is accountable. So in recognizing situations or relationships and kind of holding other people accountable in terms of, well, they did this. And so how am I going to respond to how they're offending me or hurting me or insulting me or diminishing me? I also have to recognize with accountability, what do I bring to the table? Where am I, at fault or to blame? And I don't like to use the word blame because blame instinctively brings up defensiveness. So whether I'm blaming somebody else, then that somebody else is going to get defensive. And even internally in my own mind, if I'm blaming myself, the part of me in my ego will defend myself against myself, So I don't like to use the word blame. I do think though that it's important, and in and of itself empowering when we recognize what we bring to the table, where we can recognize where we, could have done better. It wasn't our best self that showed up. So the self-accountability is a way to, live and learn. And, when you know better, you do better and you show up more and more with practice as your favorite self, when it's not just pointing the finger outwards and being defensive, or protective against triggers, that might trigger me. How about when I'm triggered, how am I making myself vulnerable to being triggered? And I'm not here saying like victim blaming or anything like that. I'm just saying, rather than being at the mercy of how other people or how other situations affect me, what can I do in the situation to improve my own situation so that I'm not at the mercy of others or other circumstances? What can I control, since I can't control others, or I can't control everything in situations, but I can control how I behave, how I react, and how I can better respond as opposed to react. Let's use an example. That's a lot of talking and preface as opposed to examples. Sorry.
I'm right with you, though. I'm right with you.
A couple of days ago, when we were kind of, talking through, future episodes and posing questions, I coached myself through a process when a question was posed to me by you, where I actually kind of removed myself, stepped back, and observed myself and recognized I'm not in a good place right now emotionally. There was a recent tragedy that occurred in amongst our island community and even microcosm, our direct school community. And so my emotions were everywhere. And I literally recognized that about myself. I recognized that I was bringing those emotions, that emotional state, to the table, so that when you asked me and posed a question to me completely different and off subject, I was reacting, bringing my emotions with me from a totally different situation, but I was bringing it to the table and I was generating a reaction to your question. So instead, I stepped back and said, okay, I don't want to come from this place of emotion that has nothing to do with the question you're posing me, but I can own that I have these emotions. And in recognizing that I'm in this emotional state for this tragedy over here in my left hand, I therefore don't want to react or respond, well, really react from to your question you're giving me in my right hand, because that's what I'm bringing to the table. I know that's unclear, or even I think everybody can recognize this generic scenario, which is there are times when I find myself being so irritated by things like, oh, that person irritates me, or that behavior irritated me. And like the word irritate, like comes out so frequently depending on the mood that I'm in. And just like people have New Year's resolutions or New Year's objectives, and they choose like a positive word, like a mantra for the year. I do that. And then I also try to think of what am I going to give up or what am I going to let go? Kind of like in the Christian faith, the Lenten season as well. Not all, what are you going to let go? And one thing I recognize at the beginning of the year is I would like to be more cognizant of giving up the word irritated, because though it may be true that something is irritating and I recognize it and I label it as that's irritating, that irritated me, how about flip the mirror and look at myself and say, or am I irritable? So is it so much that other thing is irritating? Am I actually irritable? What can I control about myself, my perspective, my viewpoint, that I'm viewing things as irritating, or that I am becoming irritated, not through the fault of the other person or the other circumstance, but it's because I am irritable.
So you've shared a number of things, and my brain naturally, when you share something so juicy, goes all over the place. And I immediately thought back to our driving episode, and I've listened to that a couple times because I found lately that while I recognize I can learn a lot and from actual driving, I do find myself more lately in that place of thinking that other drivers are out to get me, or that, their driving patterns are a direct comment on me and my life, and they're cutting me off. And the other day I was on the phone with a friend and somebody cut me off, and I just kind of yelled. And my friend said exactly that, which is like, are you always this angry when you drive? Right. And it didn't stop me, because that would have been a car accident, but it literally caught me. And I went back and I listened to the episode, and it's funny that you bring this up, because I had that moment of like, it's just in terms of driving, but there are many other examples that I've thought of as you're talking, but just specifically in driving, am I automatically primed to get into the car and bring this angst with me? And if that is the case, that is on me. That is not on any other driver. And before I get in the car, what kind of self-check will help me out? And what kind of accountability do I need to recognize in and of myself before I get into the car that has nothing to do with any other external driver? So that was what I thought of immediately. Is that similar
Yes,
in the vein that you're talking about? Yeah.
exactly. And it's kind of like, nowadays we are inundated, with trigger warnings.
Yep.
And they serve a purpose. So I'm not here to dismiss them. I mean, they serve a purpose. It's just, we also have to be cognizant, aware of, okay, if that's my trigger, what can I control? I can definitely control by avoiding triggers. And that's certainly one way about it. That's certainly one way that I go about it, is like, oh, okay, well, chocolate's a trigger, so I'm going to remove all of the chocolate from my house, kind of thing. So there's the avoidance thing. But boy, how much more empowering would it be to actually work through triggers? And I say it as if it's easy, and it's not easy, but it's clear that is a healthy thing to do. Again, not easy, not simple, but it's clear that that's a healthy thing to do. That rather than having your life so defensive and in like ready avoidance mode, how about work through, heal through what those triggers are, so as not to be triggered. And instead you are activated to heal through something so that I can be around chocolate, for example, right? So if I can work through, what I feel about chocolate, what I think about chocolate, I know I'm simplifying it with chocolate, but I think everybody understands what I'm saying. That way I don't have to, deprive my family and guests who come through the house because there's no chocolate to offer because I am the one that's triggered. Yeah. I deal with what I bring to the table. I heal through, or work through at least, what I bring to the table, so that it's not as kind of intrusive to others, but also healthy and whole for me. Yeah. So, we're recording this podcast, right now, but I'm also leaving out of town today. And Zachary, how I am. I've told you this, many times, that like I'm such like a stickler stress case because I want things just so, in terms of how to pack and when to leave for the airport and all that kind of stuff. And there are some very good things about it. So it's not throwing, the baby out with the bathwater. So it's not like, oh, now I'm not going to give a rat's patootie. I'm not going to give a shit anymore about how to pack and what time to get to the airport and making my checklist and all this kind of stuff. So I'm not saying I'm not going to do that, but I can self-check and realize my stress reaction, I am making myself stressed. Yep. There is a way to plan when I want to leave for the airport and get there in time. There is a way to pack without stress and still get the same thing done. My stress reaction is on me. And that's why when I tell other people how stressed I get, oh my God, it's packing day. So I can't do this. I can't do that. Don't call me. Don't text me. And they look at me with this look on their face, like, okay, you do you. God bless them. Thank you for still loving me in my neuroses. That's where I have to recognize, okay, I got to deal with my approach or my thought process or my mindset about travel day, because I'm the one bringing the stress to it. Same thing, especially, so that's something in the future, even more so when something is already done. Meaning, so my daughter just had, she's pre-med, she had an organic chem exam. Orgo, which I lovingly call facetiously, Orgo is definitely a weed out class for pre-meds. It is nearly universally challenging for many people. And so it is known to be the weed out class. And it nearly, being a physician was my lifelong dream. Orgo nearly weeded me out. And I brought to her all of my own angst about it. And which is so funny because my business partner, she's also a physician, and she actually did great in organic chem, and she was a TA, a teacher's assistant in organic chem, and it didn't, she didn't sweat it about Orgo. And I just realized that I was like placing all this angst a year in advance to my daughter of like, okay, make sure you're prepared for orgo and, and just power through it. And I just placed these, negative expectations on it. Now, having said that, it is challenging. And she's in some ways, a part of what I prepared her for was helpful because she could at least realize everybody, most people are feeling this way about orgo, but I was only making it worse by adding my own baggage, my own stress to it. So anyway, she just recently had a orgo exam, and it was a midterm. And she, afterwards I get the text and she was like, that was horrible. Everybody was saying that was the hardest exam they've taken so far in their life and all this kind of stuff. And so that's the common theme. And understandably, people were venting about it and were worked up about it. And she didn't feel great about it either, but it is what it is. It was what it was. And the one of her dearest friends were like, aren't you upset? Didn't you think it was hard? And my daughter's like, yeah, that was the hardest exam I've ever taken, but what am I going to do? It's done now. So on to, now I got to study for my microbiome exam. Do you know what I mean? Like what you bring to the table, it's not a blame, shame, so that you feel horrible about yourself. It's actually, you can flip that vantage point and realize how empowering it is when you realize that you control what you bring to the table. You cannot control circumstances. You cannot control other people, but okay, what am I bringing to the table? And what can I learn from how I, reacted? So I now learn that the stress for my travel, I'm bringing the stress. The situation is the same. It's my travel day. I like to pack this way. I like to have a checklist this way. And I like to get to the airport this way. Okay, I can still do that. But the stress that I'm bringing to it, I'm bringing that. Well, I control that. I control the stress I'm bringing. So, okay, when you know better, you do better, as Maya Angelou says. So live and learn from that lesson.
Yeah. If I may, as you were talking, want to bring back something that I've shared openly on the podcast before that might get a little bit emotional, but it speaks exactly to what you're talking about. So I have shared that when I had a difficult coming out time with my dad, that when I came out to them, he and I had a very fractured relationship for about 9 years after I came out. What I mean by fractured is there was civility, as in like when you see each other, we would say hello, but there really wasn't much beyond that, which was a departure from what had happened prior. So during this like 9 years or so, when we had this fractured relationship, any movie or play or musical or anything that had a father-son theme was very difficult for me to watch. So Tim Burton is known for having some kind of father-son theme in a lot of his movies. So Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, there's the theme of Willy Wonka with his dad. And he also did Big Fish, I think, and there's a theme in that of a father-son relationship. And while watching Big Fish in particular, I was like, I can't watch this movie anymore. I wish I would have known that there was this father-son theme. I can't watch it, blah, blah, blah. Now, I was in a place of my relationship with my dad that this was, for lack of a better word, a trigger, that this was a spot for me that was really difficult, that I was still working through. So fast forward, as I've spoken, my dad and I had a connection shortly before my wedding. And since then, our relationship has only grown and blossomed and been wonderful. But I would say the shadows of that father-son relationship moment for me was still present for quite a while. In working in therapy with a therapist, I made a joke about the musical The Lion King. In the musical The Lion King, Simba has this beautiful song called Endless Nights. And if any of you are into musical theater, I encourage you to go check this song out because it's absolutely lovely. And it's all about Simba feeling lost without his dad. Now, when I was introduced to this song in high school, it made me cry just because it was so well sung and it's so powerful. It's such a magical moment. And then somehow in my therapy session, I brought this up, and, God love my therapist. And he just jumped on it right away. It just zeroed in, and he's like, wait, what's going on here? And he said essentially what you're talking about right now, which is the world cannot be censored because of my own things that I'm working through, which is okay. I can know them, right? And then I have a whole host of choices. I also can do the work of going through what that looks like for me, what it feels like for me. Because what I also realized is anybody who had a strong relationship with their dad, I was mad at, or I was jealous of, or I had an emotional reaction to them. And I somehow felt that it was unfair that they had what I didn't have. And so a lot of my mental thinking was my own stuff directed at them when I wasn't doing the work, as you said, to just look inward and see what I was thinking, feeling, et cetera, and how I could approach a situation with control and agency and choice, and even just awareness, right?
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't even considered that. And it was such an aha moment because I recognized that for so long, my own irritability, my own jealousy, all of my reactions to anything that demonstrated a strong relationship or even an emotional connection between a father and son, I immediately reacted to without ever realizing that I could, for lack of a better phrase, point that finger back at me and be like, how am I entering this? Where am I coming to it? And so I share that with you because it really was a transformative moment, not just in my relationship with my dad, but also building that awareness that triggers or situations where we get irritable are really more of a reflection of where we come into it than anything else. And right. Just that awareness, in addition to what we do with it, is where the Simply Enough work really does come in. And I share that story as just to build connection with exactly what you're saying as another example.
I'm right there with you. So one of my things, like I said, in terms of my own journey of my Simply Enoughness is the people pleasing that I had to unlearn. And so initially what I thought was the quote, best way to do it is, right, the catchphrase now everybody talks about is boundaries. Mm-hmm. And boundaries are super, super important. Yeah. But the way that I almost approach it is like defensively, somebody asks something of me, oop, boundary up. Or, somebody hurts me once, oop, boundary up. And that is just almost, such a armored, defensive way to live, as well as pointing at everybody else. And so really I'm putting the power in their hands and I'm victim to them because I'm putting the blame on them. But what I recognize that boundaries are still important. So I'm not in any way discounting boundaries. It's the way one approaches boundaries. And it's the way one approaches when something is being asked of oneself, which is rather than being defensive, what I've come to learn is, in all fairness to those people that ask so much of me, you teach people how to treat you. You train people how to treat you, right? And so I enabled that and I encouraged that by being a doormat and by being afraid of how they felt if I stood my ground. So in recognizing the balance of some of them are narcissists and just keep asking. So I'm not all of a sudden making or removing or excusing certain behaviors. I just also recognize how I kind of enabled this relationship of the one up, one down, my being the one down position, and how can I help? And you ask me to jump how high? They're not necessarily, evil incarnate because they're asking me to jump, because I've trained them to expect me to jump and ask how high whenever they do that. So I trained that. So I brought that to the table. Yeah. Also, I recognize too, you are the company that you keep. So when I recognize when I'm feeling down and I choose this personality or this group of people to vent with, and venting is important, but in venting, just continue to vent and just kind of seep in that negativity, and then I don't feel good about it. Okay, am I going to blame them? Like, ooh, those people are so negative, and
Yep.
no, I'm the one choosing to seep in that negativity. I can have, accountability of my choices, and I can look to choose people who can empathize and hear me vent, and then we can lift ourselves out of that scenario. Or again, also not depending on other people, even myself. So back full circle to this tragedy that our island community and microcosm, our school community, was recently dealing with. I was grieving, and in grieving, I felt like I couldn't pull myself out of grieving. And then I realized, okay, now I'm almost being self-indulgent in my grieving. So how the heck am I ever going to get out of grieving if I keep focusing on my grieving? I'm not denying that I'm grieving, but if I just keep focusing and making my grieving dramatic and seeking out other people who are authentically grieving, but like dwelling in the drama of the grief, as opposed to just acknowledging and experiencing the grief. You can experience grief or you can dramatize grief, right? So I can either stay there, or I can choose to recognize that I'm almost being self-indulgent in my grief. And so what I'm going to do is instead do something for somebody else who is even closer to the situation. And therefore, in my doing something for that person or those people, I lift them, but I notably lifted myself out of the self-indulgent grief because I recognize what I was doing to myself. And so I can lift myself up when I have that awareness and that acknowledgement of what I was doing to myself. Does that make sense?
It does. And I just want to thank you for giving us the insight into the ways in which you self-coached yourself. So just by giving us that example, I think you offer a way for those of us to try this out and to what I think is so helpful about what you did is you talked personally and then acknowledged where in your grieving it crossed over a line for you. And you would say, this grieving is now in a place where I'm going to say that it's more this rather than, like, I think you said indulgent. Is that the word that you used? Yes. So everyone's barometer is going to be different, but the act of doing that means you have to stop and take pause with yourself and do that check-in. You modeled that for us today, and you modeled that in such a way that I think is also important because it is such a this is for those of you on the continent or maybe around the world, this is such a moment for the people of Hawaii and the people of this community. So what Elizabeth is speaking about is the type of occurrence that shakes everyone, like, and depending on where they are in connection with this situation, the ripple effects are still, or the ripples are still quite large as you move out of the center. So Elizabeth gave us a tremendous insight into somebody who is really processing something that is very difficult to process. And you just talking it through, I think, reinforces what what you started with this episode is, before we even look outward, we have to look inward. And sometimes we have to confront what things that we do, either, I'm not saying you did this, so forgive me, but to self-sabotage or to over dramatize or to make something more than what it is, or it's an acknowledgement of where we are. You're actually grieving. And so the constant check and the model of the ways in which you are asking yourself these questions to say, is this what this is? Is this where I'm at? Oh no, I'm actually grieving to the point of indulgence. Okay, now what? I can channel this and do something, was a tremendous example of something that we can all do in our lives in any other situation. And I want to say, if it's okay, you did that on the call or in our conversation prior to this episode. And I'll just say that one of my quote unquote triggers or irritations is when people are not reflective in the way that you and I are. It bothers me, right? And I do get this sense of like, oh, how could they not see that they did this, blah, 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 blah. And in that conversation, my friend Elizabeth reminded me that truly that irritation, that trigger, that moment of feeling some kind of feeling towards another person's behavior is actually just an indication that they are not my people. They have shown me who they are. And really, the work of alignment of myself is an acknowledgement that that bothers me. I don't like it. But then the actionable step is to walk away. Or not even to walk away, to just stand my ground, let them walk away, because they are not my people. I don't have to get into the fight. I don't have to like talk to them. I don't have to take the bait. I can just stand in my place without any armor, because I myself am beautiful in and of myself. And that moment of like recognize I'm pissed. I want justice. I'm angry. How could they do this? How could they do that? And you said, they can because they did. And that's okay for them. That's not okay for you and the people that you connect with and who your people are. And that's all you need to know. So not only did you model that, but you also gave it to me in a call prior. And I wanted to share that as another layer on top of the theme of this episode.
I'm so glad. You know, that kind of catchphrase, you know, in breakups of relationships where trying to soften the blow, it's not you, it's me. And a lot of times that's not true, right? Because really it's like, I'll say it, but I really do believe it's you know, kind of thing. But really, that truly rings true when we self-reflect. And that's all that we can control, is what we do, you know, what we think, what we feel, and then how we act. And then what the outcome is what we control because of that. And so really it rings true, rather than pointing fingers and being defensive. And boundaries are important, but the way one maintains boundaries can be done in different ways. If we can, instead of saying it's you and it's you and it's you and you're triggering me and this is doing that, and the power is external. But really, when you truly embody, it's not you, it's me. The me is in your control. And so that self-reflection, that with self-compassion, that autonomy and that agency comes from a centered self. The only way that one can truly center oneself and then align with your higher self and align with the divine is with self-reflection, is with taking that mirror and looking at one's self, so that it's not you, it truly is me.
Okay, listeners, remember, you are not just simply enough.
You are more than enough.
Just as you are.
Period.
Period.
Mwah.